Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about long-term architecture. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, if an engineer claims to you that they understand long-term architecture, but they've never stayed long enough to see their own decision play out over the course of several years, are they really as experienced as they claim? Why not? Well, I would say that this is pretty tricky because here it basically comes down to how many times have you built a system that is similar, how much reflecting have you done on systems that you have been working on, and what led to the state that you are in, and how good are you at your job. Basically, how well do you analyze these sorts of things. So something that I struggle with on a almost daily basis with software developers is to debate what a good choice looks like in every single code review, every single pull request, every single technical discussion or like migration discussion or anything like that, whatever we're doing. It's always a question of, should we do A or should we do B? Because if I put, let's say you and me, we are working together and you write some code and I put some few suggestions on what I think should be done and so forth and so forth, unless we are perfectly aligned and we're talking about really trivial things, it becomes a question of, are we going to do your thing or are we going to do my thing? And then if we can't really agree on, as I said, it's a trivial thing, then a bigger discussion is necessary, and I have to relate to you why I believe that we should do this thing that I'm suggesting, and then of course you will have to convince me. Like it becomes basically a discussion between us of what is the future impact of this. So like, what are the pros and the cons? The pros and the cons of this setup. Now, this is where it gets tricky. Because if we just do it in a single code review, even that can be tricky. Because I might say to you that I want you to move all these files over to that format, we should use that pattern or this pattern and so forth. And you can argue and you can say that no, actually I think that this pattern is better or that pattern is better. And that's why I tell people that this is the realm of where over-engineering starts happening, because we're both trying to project what we think is going to be a long-term good solution, because usually, well, short-term of course as well, but like just overall, like it's hard to distinguish always between a short-term solution that is good and a long-term solution that is good in some cases. And so the debate basically becomes, all right, how good are you and me at predicting the future basically together in this case, or if we're on opposite side of the argument individually. And if you think a little bit about that, the thing that makes it possible for me or you to see how this thing is going to play out basically comes down to this thing that I've said before, this gut feeling that you have based on looking at tons of different situations and similar patterns and things like that. That's the intuition that we humans have. I argue at least this is what intuition basically is: pattern recognition. You see a pattern and you see it in many places. You see roughly a cause and effect type of observations for a long time, and then you start to see a pattern in it, and then you start seeing similar situations where that pattern might fit. And I'm not just talking design patterns now, guys. I'm talking just in general, just as how some people will know if it's going to rain today because the clouds are sort of forming in a way, or the moisture in the air is a certain way, and so forth. Or you know when you're about to have a row with one of your beloved ones because they're sort of in a shitty mood and they have these subtle cues that they're doing, all that stuff. Same deal here. And so when someone tells me that they know what long-term architecture is about and so forth, the thing I will do, of course, is the same thing they will do. Well, they will draw upon their own personal experiences, and then we will discuss back and forth what we see, what pros and cons we have with any given solution. And then when I say I evaluate you, and you tell me that, well, Frederick, in my experience, microservices is the best long-term strategy. Well, how am I going to prove you wrong? Well, I would have to do basically the same thing you would do in a debate. I will have to present arguments where situations have occurred to me or other people, references basically, of when that is not true. If I don't believe it, of course, or situations where it might have worked for certain situations. And that is really what it comes down to. And as I said, there is no way for me to definitively prove to you that if you have worked for just a few years and then you believe that, let's say, functional programming is the future. We'll take these trivial examples because this is such a hard question to answer, honestly. Well, if you believe that functional programming is the best thing ever, well, I can tell you, for example, that yeah, it probably is, but have you considered that very few software developers actually know how to do that? So sure, in the hands of a master or under the right circumstances, you might be completely right. But what are the odds? And that's what it always comes down to. What are the odds that every single person in 10 years from now will have had your level of understanding, at least, of functional programming? Are you confident in that is likely? And that's what it comes down to. How confident are you, and how do you believe my reasoning? Is my reasoning correct here? Because if I'm wrong, which is the thing that happens, like you have guys who say exactly the thing that I was saying. We have senior level software developers, we have architects, we have all these types of people who basically go in and say, hey, let's buy this super expensive system because we really need better telemetrics, because that is the thing that is going to help us debug our systems better and so forth. And they might invest millions into it, or into an architecture that doesn't play out. And the reason why these things happen is because they have the credibility of making these sorts of decisions, because you believe that they are experienced, and they probably are experienced. But as I've said before, guys, experience isn't the end of all things. That has to do with your intelligence, it has to do with your intuition, and so forth and so on. It's talent as well. So what is the difference here? Well, it's the same thing as with stockbrokers and so forth. If you have a really experienced stockbroker who really knows how to predict patterns and really is talented with foreseeing what effect certain decisions will have, they will do on average better. That doesn't mean that they always win or that they always succeed. It's just on average they do that. The same thing with me. So if I'm a really experienced software developer and I know what it's going to work here and here and here and here, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be right for every situation. It's just on average I might do better than someone who doesn't have that experience. So when I talk with somebody else, it's a completely subjective thing. I can, of course, if you have people who are extremely inexperienced, as I said, who say something like functional programming will save us all, that probably most people can get behind, and that's probably very rarely true. But it becomes harder and harder the more experience you get and the more abstract the question becomes. I've had lengthy conversations with the highest paid software developers and architects in a company where we debated literally if you could have a folder with a certain name, or if you could not have that folder, because we were arguing exactly this point. What is the future going to be? What mental effect is it going to have to name that thing there? Will everybody understand? Like it gets to a point where nobody can prove this. It's just basically you drawing upon all these experiences and things like that and trying to convey a solid message, or basically using rhetoric and persuasion and negotiation to convince the other party. And in some cases you just have to do the democratic thing. But we still have the experience, we have all of these things, but it's just that even though we are experienced, we're basically trying to predict the future. And how good we are at that, as I said, it comes down to how good are we at our work, and how good are we at predicting patterns, and how good is our intuition. It's the same deal for anybody who has been like an investor or a researcher or something like that. They get a hunch about things that is based on one part their experience and one part their talent with whatever they're doing. So what I want you to take away from this is that I would say that yes, you can claim to have a good understanding of long-term architecture even if you haven't seen the end of a given architecture, because as I said, you can predict a pattern to a certain point. But let's take this one for example, guys. If I write a solid solution for a given situation and it really works over months and months and maybe even years, and then I leave the company and somebody else comes in who has a completely different mindset. As I said, let's say that I went object oriented and they go functional. How would you predict that would happen? I mean, most of our code bases are most likely going to live longer than you and me. And there's no way for you to know perfectly well how every single person who ever touches that code is going to think and behave and what decision they're going to make and so forth. That's why everybody's in a damn migration all the time. Everybody's migrating all the time to something because someone before them made a decision that they don't agree with any longer. And the more things you see, the more times you have a conversation with different types of developers and different types of systems and so forth, the better your intuition is going to be for what's going to stick and what's not going to stick, what's going to work, and what's going to be tricky for people to make work. And that's the thing that makes you good at this stuff. That's the stuff that allows you to make solid investments. And I would say that you don't have to, there is. It's no one, I would argue, I don't think that there's a single software developer, maybe unless they were there until the system really went down or until it was decommissioned. Like most software developers, guys, haven't seen the end of the lifespan of their own system. But that doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to predict what a long-term investment is going to, what a good long-term investment is going to look like. They can definitely see that, because even if you can't see the end of every system, you can see enough that you can start getting a feel for the trend, and then you can start seeing situations where things don't work so well or they do work so well and so forth, and you can develop intuition for certain things. And that's the thing that I argue is the thing that is debated in every pull request, in every single architect's meeting, etc. Is this solution really good right now, and how good is it in the future? And that, as I said, I don't think that's ever gonna stop happening. Have a great day.